So for those just joining, we'll give it a couple of minutes as more people join, and then we will kick off. Yeah, so Drago, you were saying that there was limited news items at the moment in Bulgaria. Well, I don't know if you followed the UK news at all, but it's very, very limited here as well.
Probably it's a bit early, yes, it's true, but the truth is actually that our media landscape is overwhelmed by the political disputes, to put it very mildly. So that's the reason. And we have to find a way to penetrate to that haze, informational haze that is covering us at the moment. When that's one of the ways. By using the time, investing the time to talk about it.
Good, and certainly there's plenty of chaos in the UK. Apostol, we can see you twice, or rather we can't see you twice, but we can see two incidences. If we just sort this out and then we'll kick off.
I don't know why. I'm only joined once. Okay, that's not.
Yeah,
Hi.
sorry about that.
Somebody's using maybe the account. Hi, Alexander.
Okay, but you can hear us.
Yeah.
Okay, excellent. All right. So let us kick off. We are recording it, everybody. So if you have an issue with that, then sorry, but you will have to leave. We do want to make it available to others afterwards. So what I'd like to do is just introduce our session today. So welcome panelists, welcome people listening in. Delighted to have you with us for the next hour or two. This is part of Walk2COP27, so I'd like to talk about that. But before that, I'd like to talk a little bit about COP27 itself, because part of this is really information exchange in and around climate change in Bulgaria and more broadly, and also to try and highlight and create a sort of groundswell of interest in COP27 itself. So a few introductory remarks from me. We won't keep that too long, I promise. If it's too long, put up your hand and I'll stop. The second is then, very importantly, is to give our opportunity for our excellent panelists to talk from their perspectives. So they have a number of different perspectives to bring to the table. We've got 7 panelists, and so we'll split it into 2 panels, and I'll introduce them in a minute very quickly. Throughout their sessions, and indeed throughout my session, do feel free to ask questions via Q&A, and we will do our best to answer those either during the session or afterwards, and then we'll close. And we're likely to close before the 2 hours is up. We will record it and we'll make it available offline. So I'm Sam Baker. I am speaking on behalf of all of those who have been involved in Walk2COP27, including our panelists here. And this is an initiative which we've spent this year working on, and I'll introduce that in a minute. And before we do that, let's have some reflections. Let's just think a little bit about COP. And just a sort of context from my perspective is really to say, I'm a layperson. I have not been following 27 COPs. I have not been in the blue zone making policy. I'm a strategy consultant. I've looked outside in. I got involved in COP26 as the first time, really as an outsider. And I'm obviously observing and watching what's happening to COP27. So this is not an expert opinion. This is a layperson's opinion from somebody who's soaked up as much information as I can, and also heard from lots of people through this initiative of Walk2COP27. So my summary around COP27 is that the need for progress can't be clearer. The IPCC reports I always reach for, they paint this picture of huge challenge. And if people don't know those, they are very good short summaries to look at, which help us understand the implications of climate change and the implications for different locations on the planet and collectively. So absolutely, in many ways, terrifying, particularly when we consider that those reports are written to a consensus. And so there are many, many scientific inputs, but they are written for a set of clients, and those clients are the policymakers in the many countries that they're writing that report for. So basically the UN countries. So it is a consensus. So it's unlikely to be the worst case scenario. So when we think about that and you read Guterres's commentary on it, it is quite frightening. So the second point really around the context is prioritization. So are we or are we not prioritizing climate change and its responses, nationally and internationally? And just one point of reference here, which again I found unsettling. So this is the International Institute of Economics and Peace. So they do a survey of 220 of people in 220 countries. So this was reported on yesterday. It is a bit out of date, and it reports on attitudes towards climate change as a priority before the Ukraine war, and compares it to the previous year. So this is largely a 2021 viewpoint. And what they found is actually 1.5 percentage points decrease in prioritization across the world of climate change and its responses. Lots of reasons for that, of course, displacement by COVID and cost of living and whatever, even last year rather than the war. But notwithstanding that, that is a big challenge for us, given we have those huge challenges represented in IPCC. It is the biggest polluter, which has the least sense of concern around climate change, aka China. There's marginal improvements in North America and in Europe, but it's still only 50-55% of people who think this is a major concern. So the next point, obviously, is COVID and the war. And so, this has resulted in other priorities. And obviously, if you're being shelled, you're really only thinking about one thing, and that is short-term survival. So we do understand that. But of course, the repercussions are much broader. And they're broader in terms of people talking about energy security, in terms of the price of energy, but also in terms of the broader geopolitical coalitions or cohesiveness that we need and hope for in order to address climate change. So those things are creating, challenge left, right, and center to this agenda. And what I would say finally on this element is the political polarization, which is really unwanted. So in the UK, just as an example, we've got the current government trying to develop a narrative which says you can either have growth or you can begin to address the climate challenge. So this is a narrative which is unwelcome, which creates political polarization. And to some extent, we've seen that throughout the US as well. And so that is unwelcome. And all of the backdrop to this, of course, is that emissions are actually increasing. And so this is 2022, the second year of the decade when we hope that they were going to fall between 7 and 9% year on year to halve emissions over the decade. So big challenges. So a challenge for COP, and that underscores the importance of a big international conference on climate change. So it's billed as the African COP, as we've seen, or Together for Implementation. So big focus on implementation rather than sort of rule setting or target setting. It's supposed to be about implementation, which of course, for all of us, we know that's a challenge. It's easier to talk about things in the future and commit to things which we don't necessarily have to do something about now than anything else. And so it's billed as Together for Implementation. It's got a number of different component parts. And the first is mitigation. So we hoped that COP26 was going to deliver a set of nationally defined contributions. So for those who don't know what those are, they're basically just plans around how each country will manage down their emissions. So we hoped that those nationally defined contributions in COP26 were going to meet the Paris Agreement of limiting the temperature increase to 2 degrees and preferably 1.5 degrees going forward. It didn't happen. And in fact, the estimates were for 2.4%. So the nationally defined contributions which were presented were to 2.4%. So it's really important that those come out again, are revised, made more aggressive. So we begin to think that we can meet that Paris Agreement, which was such a yardstick and such an emblem of hope in our international challenge to address climate change. So the mitigation, really, really important, leftover business from COP26. And we hope, very much hope, that all the countries will revise their nationally defined contributions and make them more aggressive. So the other piece of this is to say we know from the IPCC reports, we know from the challenges we're facing in our own countries and many others, like the Pakistan floods or Hurricane Ian. So we know that adaptation, adaptation is required. We need to think carefully and plan cleverly for withstanding the challenges from the climate change that we know is underway and will happen and increase. And so there is an expectation that we have national adaptation plans. So rather than like the nationally defined contributions, that we have adaptation plans in at a national level, that those can be compared and contrasted between countries. And we also obviously hope that the financing for adaptation, whether that's in country or between countries, becomes more evident and more ring-fenced. So that brings us very quickly to the third part to this, which is finance. So, there has been a lot of talk about 100 billion. So this is a payment agreed in 2009, which was supposed to kick off in 2015, which was from, as the UN call it, the global north to the global south. It hasn't been met yet, although it's getting close to 100 billion. And the intention here was to stimulate the transition, and particularly the energy transition, in the countries who perhaps can't afford it by themselves. In COP26 in Glasgow, there was a lot of talk about private financing. I think that's got to, there has been limited mobilization of the large number of funds that were talked about. There is a hope that national budgets will begin to reflect both mitigation and adaptation more specifically. There is hope that we make progress against carbon markets as well, but also that this particularly private sector concept of ESG is used to increase the funding of flows to solutions which help us address climate change and to organizations who don't make things worse, at least. Number 4 is loss and damage. So again, this is perhaps in part is both a principle, but also a financing solution where there is this very important concept, which you might call climate justice, which says that the people who've contributed to the biggest issues here are not the ones necessarily suffering the worst. And so how do we compensate effectively from the people who have benefited from economic growth, but created the emissions and the challenge in the process, and the people who haven't benefited from that, but are getting some of the negatives? So loss and damage was aired at COP26. It was actually aired during 2015 in the Paris Agreement as well. But countries have yet to agree. And in fact, the European Union, and with the exclusion of Denmark and Germany and the US, both seem to have made commentary against the creation of a loss and damage fund, which would allow a sort of international process and amount of money to begin to compensate people and countries which have tremendous challenge. And just, a point of reference there, they were saying that the Pakistan floods probably cost 30 to 40 billion dollars to repair the damage to the infrastructure, etc., in that economy and society. So this isn't compensating for life. This is compensating for damage to the environment and to the infrastructure. So they reckon that's over $30 billion, just order of magnitude. So one country, $30 billion. So it gives you a sense, everybody a sense of just what that loss and damage might have to deal with. And of course, there's a lot of other things that happen at COP. Excuse me. There are a lot of interesting agreements in Glasgow, which weren't part perhaps of the formal Blue Zone discussions, which included work on forests, bilateral between China and the US, which of course has been taken off the table now, but we might hope for breakthroughs in that type of agreement, but also around methane as well. So there's lots there. So big challenge. We need COP to work, lots on the agenda. And part of what we're doing now in our discussion today is to keep COP on the agenda, because it might not be perfect, but it is at least an organization where sometimes heads of state, but are at least important representatives of each country turn up to discuss this important issue. And personally, I take away some hope from people like yourselves, from the many people I've met during the initiative Walk2COP27, who want to talk about this, who want to keep it on the agenda, and who are pushing it at a national level or an international level, or even going to COP itself, and some of you will be going, to make sure that this isn't a quiet COP. It's not one that gets ignored because of all these other issues, but it does make some real progress. So thank you, all of you who are contributing to that. And as I said, that gives me great hope in the face of adversity. So Walk2COP27 is a simple initiative. It's been running since the 22nd of September. It completes just before COP. And the idea of Walk2COP27 was mass participation to drive climate action. And the way we think about climate action is decarbonization or mitigation, it's resilience, aka adaptation, it's justice that we've just been talking about, but it's also circularity. So are we designing a new world and set of systems which aren't going to burden us in 20 years because there's such a drag on the planet? So those are our four sort of target outcomes for climate action. And we do this in three ways: through trying to create a platform for learning. So today is an important part of that. So people learning from our panelists, hopefully the panelists learning from each other, and me learning from everybody. The second is to forge solidarity. So allow people to feel like they're walking together against an issue of common concern. And then the final one is connections. So I think the connection point is so important. We need to do this together. We need to collaborate together and cooperate. And that starts with knowing each other and connections. So there are 4 ways to get involved. And we really hope we'll get good Bulgarian participation. To be honest, we don't have huge participation at the moment. So please take a note of that first link. So the first way to engage is to register as yourself, but to join a team. So that might be your organization, your football team, your family, your friends, doesn't matter. So to register, and there's an app that sits behind that, and you can walk, run, cycle, wheelchair, clock that distance in kilometers. We will plant trees in Burundi through the Jane Goodall Institute with every kilometer moved. And I hope that people who join that feel this sense of collective movement in a small way. Yes, it's a bit of fun, but it's also a collective movement from north to south. And to allow us to feel that that movement from north to south is in place, we've got 12 town halls. So this is number 8. We started in Scotland on the 22nd. We've been having these town halls in these different countries to hear what people in those countries have to say about climate change and about COP. This is part of the education and allows us to imagine that we're walking down towards Egypt. And so we've got 3 very important ones coming after today, which of course is very important in itself. So we're going down into the Middle East. And what we also have is something called the World Town Hall, where everybody can join, and we will use a collaborative platform to allow us to ask opinions of everybody. You know, hopefully we can get thousands of people to join in, and we can get a moderated workshop where everybody's voice can be heard. The third is a series of clubhouse sessions. So these are participant-led sessions, which individuals can run. And then finally, just join in, please, on social media. Use this initiative to highlight what you're doing and vice versa. And I think then we will all benefit by raising our voices against climate change. So with that, that's the end of my introduction. So we've got, as I said, 2 panels. So the first one is really focused on perhaps on sort of activism, NGOs. And so we've got Apostol. So Apostol, we're very much looking forward to hearing you from WWF. And we've got Radi from Zemiata, aka for me, Friends of the Earth. So Radi, looking forward to your opinion and view. And Rusana from PanGea, connected to WWF. Again, very much looking forward to what you have to say. And I think we all recognize the importance of the youth voice in this particular topic, absolutely critical. What we'll then do, so we'll hear from them, 4 to 5 minutes from each of them to talk about their perspectives. I'll ask a couple of questions. I'll keep an eye on Q&A so we can ask questions that have come from the floor. And what we'll then move on to into perhaps something which is a little bit more implementation focused. And so there we've got Drago, Julian, Plamena, and Todor. And this is a combination of sort of energy, reflections on housing, location-based implementation. And so there's a little bit more of a sense of implementation rather than perhaps communication, movement building, and activism. Okay, so we've got sort of 2 really interesting panelists, 2 different sort of slightly different flavors of panels, and then we will wrap up. So if we can start, so Apostol, I'll drop the screen, and if I can start up with Apostol, and then we can move on to Radi and Rusana, and then I will have a few questions for you, if I may.
Thank you very much, Sam, and I'm very happy to participate in this event. This is a very important process for us because it is activist, and congratulations to all the activists and people of all ages and walks of life and abilities who are taking part in this initiative. So once again, congratulations for this work and bringing it to Bulgaria. I have to say that it has been a very difficult year for activism, for climate activism in Bulgaria. We have been on the back foot, so to speak, and as you can see behind me, the European Union flag. Basically, the European Green Deal has entered a decisive phase in the trialogues in Brussels. You know, this is a push that also is related to the strong negotiation position that the European Union as a bloc can have in COP27 on the very important topics of mitigation, of adaptation, loss and damage, you know, everything where European Union is seen as a climate leader. Unfortunately, European Union is not uniform. So in our part of the Union, in the Central and Eastern Europe, we see a lot of pushback against ambitious climate targets, which have not even materialized. For example, the co-exit target in Bulgaria. So we see a lot of pushback. We see a lot of misunderstanding of what the European Green Deal is about, of what climate action is about. And this requires patient activism. It requires very committed activism. So I congratulate once again all the organizations that are present on this panel, our colleagues from the Zemiata, our colleagues of popularizing science in Climateka, and of course our young activists from all the organizations, and especially PanGea, which is a very new organization for WWF. It is difficult to be in the battle for this activism. It is emotionally draining. It is very frustrating. We see over the couple of last week, apart from very active kind of demonstrations and protests, we literally see leading authors of the IPCC report, which has now sunk in. It was very fresh when the Glasgow COP happened, but it has now sunk in. And we come to realize what cold red really means for our region, for Europe and everybody. So we see this activism, you know, even scientists taking part in these events. Unfortunately, we don't see enough of it in Bulgaria. We need it both sides. I mean, we need people who are actively pushing for climate ambition. We need also people who can lead dialogue. And it's more important than ever. There is a huge policy process that has to basically set the process for Bulgaria getting a climate neutrality goal, which would then kickstart all the other goals that we have. At WWF, we want to very much link the climate and biodiversity crisis that are so connected. And I have to remind that there is another COP meeting in Canada 1 month after the COP27 on climate in Glasgow. And above all, we just want to link these kind of separate activist elements together, because more and more we realize that in each country, in each sector and continent, we have to fight for climate justice. So it's the same. Energy poverty, you know, access to justice, you know, the needing to amend our climate law so that it ensures it for Bulgarians. And it's a difficult fight. So again, congratulations to all the colleagues, and I'll be happy to hear also what you have to say.
Ready. Thank you.
Thank you very much also for the invitation and for the great initiative, which I also joined in the Atlas Go Up, mainly walking and biking so far. I am Radostina, and since 2012 I've been a volunteer and activist in Zemiata. I've had some other endeavors, but for almost 4 years already, I'm part of the climate and energy team, leading our co-phase out campaign. I have studied environmental sciences and policy, also environmental economics. And I had the honor to participate in COP25, also in the youth-related summit. I would like to start telling you a bit more on how the perceptions of climate change have changed, comparing 5 years ago and nowadays. So in 2017, as a representative of Mladi za Zemiata, the youth network of my organization, I joined the summer climate camp together with activists and young people from Italy, Ecuador, and Nigeria. And together we planned a campaign on awareness raising on climate change And also we were asking one question to the ordinary people, how climate change is affecting me. And we received some curious results. Of course, the impacts were mostly felt in Africa, but also in Rome, as they were having almost all summer long water shortages and water regime. In Bulgaria, 5 years ago, people mostly shared with us their personal stories and so-called testimonies from their experience as farmers or doing it as a hobby, and experiences drought, hail, some intense rainfall. It was also curious to hear the view of bird watchers who have noticed definitely some changed patterns in the migratory birds they love. For example, returning earlier from the southern lands when there is limited food available for them. Another interesting group was people doing winter sports like skiing and snowboarding. And again, they have felt themselves these shortened periods when the natural snow cover remains, and also how unusually late arrives the good snowfall. I should say that there were also some people who have been already affected by flash floods resulting from intense and for a short time rainfalls. And yeah, one of these people was also my grandmother, and yeah, we had her testimony in the campaign. And to compare the situation, actually nowadays it's growing, the number of the people who are feeling these negative impacts on themselves or on their livelihoods. But the positive thing is that in comparison with 5 years ago, people now are much more aware around climate change. And it's partly, I would say, thanks to the youth climate movement led by Greta Thunberg, but also by the political willingness showed in the European Union in bringing forward the European Green Deal. And I would say that still a broad information campaign is needed for the general public, and also access to climate and environmental education. When all the people are aware on the causes, impacts, and also the solutions to the climate crisis, they would be empowered to act in their own spheres. And I should say that we are having quite a good cooperation with climate activists from the Fridays for Future movement, also especially in the climate education domain. Actually, one month ago, we cooperated for a special event, Days for Climate Action and Climate Education, as Bulgarian International Climate Strike. And yeah, this direction is something the young activists are quite interested in, and will keep moving forward. And yeah, I have some other good examples in the policy sphere, but maybe that would be part of the next discussion. And I should give the floor now to Rusana.
Thank you, Adi.
Yeah, thank you for the invitation and thank you for the opportunity to be part of this panel. My name is Rusana Toncheva and I am the president of PanGea, Youth Environmental Organization of WWF Bulgaria. As a youth, I'm not an expert on this topic like the other panelists, but I will try to explain the point of view of one active youngster on the situation in our country. I think it's fair to say that climate change is a topic with observable consequences on the one hand, but on the other, it is difficult for us, young people, to address this issue and to explain it to our peers. Whereas problems like deforestation and those related to wildlife are much easier for us to explain to a student. There is no doubt that for youth to make a project related to climate change and just transition, which would have a real impact on society, is difficult. But we will do our best to achieve this with the help of experts like yourselves. I would like to share some background on myself here as well. I'm going to university next year, and I hope that I will study physics. And my plan is to specialize in energy and environmental physics, with the hopes of working in the sustainable energy sector. And the truth is that as it stands right now, I cannot see my future in Bulgaria. I know that I can find job opportunities here, but we have a long way to go in order to attain the achievements of other countries in this field. And I'm not the only one who is on the same wavelength. If appropriate education and job opportunities are offered to the students and young people, especially in the most affected regions, for example, coal mining territories, I think that the future would be far more than bright. And maybe that's everything that I want to share with you.
Rusana, thank you. Yeah, and I wish you good luck in that next stage of going off to study. So anyway, thank you very much, the three of you. So I guess we've heard Radi from this change in opinion, the fact that more people are being impacted. But could you give us any one of the three of you could just give us a sense of, order of magnitude? Is this something that is generally well understood, a topic of conversation, and therefore it's more of a question of mobilization? Or do you feel it's still, you've got a small number of people proportionally who do understand it and you're still trying to push it out? So where are we, and how does the physical impacts that you talked about, the snows, the flooding, the whatever, how does that sort of feed into that awareness? And Radi, you sort of touched on that. I'm just trying to get a sense of order of magnitude.
Well, I would say that still the awareness level is not really high. I mean, it's higher in some rather expert groups or activist groups, but not that much in the people from various sides of life. Actually, it's this year, we had a good example of adopting and starting the position of vice premier for climate change. And this position indeed managed, in our case, only for 6 months, but hopefully it will be continued with next governments. So this position and the person managed to kind of coordinate and to gather experts from the various ministries and fields to work together and to introduce the climate policies and the reduction measures better in their fields. So that's why I mentioned that as you start first at this national level, you can also bring forward such a wider information campaign, because still it's hard for the people to make the connections how one extreme weather event is being strengthened by their own activities, or more general by the activities of the national authorities. So we still need to work on better clarifying these connections. But yeah, we're on the way.
Yeah. Okay. Good. And I think, and the reason I think this is so important, and I think in Greta's sort of recent book, she talks about this, which is not surprising, but we don't see sort of in this country, and it sounds like in Bulgaria, but also in COP, we don't see national governments thinking that it's in their interest to address this aggressively. And yet there is a groundswell of concern and opinion from citizens. So there seems to be this sort of disconnect, and the disconnect maybe is prioritization. Of course, there's a general sense of awareness as well, but there does seem to be this disconnect. So Apostol, have you got, and I think the disconnect, by the way, certainly in the UK and parts of Europe, the heat wave, we're beginning to see ourselves on international news because it's so hot in the UK. I mean, that is unheard of, and then of course people think, well, what happens if that happens, 10 more times this year, and then 15 times next year? This actually changes everything. And people didn't, not that well, people did die actually, so the death rate increased, but it wasn't a, should we say, a catastrophe, a disaster, but it certainly opened up many people's eyes. So I think that sort of sense of whether or not there's a groundswell of opinion, there is connection and attribution to the challenges that we're facing, is so important, because of course we know that that feeds through to what politicians do in terms of representing the people. So Apostol, Rusana, any reflections yourselves on people making those connections?
I just have to say that I had the privilege to be in the UK about a week before the heat wave this summer. And I was struck when walking down a bookstore at Windsor. I just came in and there was somebody like the bookkeeper who was saying that, oh, it's not a good time to travel now because it will be 30 degrees tomorrow. So that was before it was 40 degrees a week after, and the runway melted on the airport in Bhutan where I took off. So I understand that unfortunately we are adaptable to this kind of long-term risks, in the meaning that we are risk-taking creatures, so we calculate risk differently when it happens. And I'm very afraid by this, because we are starting to normalize things that in the long run are incompatible with our civilization, our agriculture, our way of life. So if you see the historic droughts on the Danube this year, if you see some of the extreme flood events, and especially if you go to the global south and see what is happening with the destabilization of the monsoon rains in Pakistan and elsewhere, this is a risk that we shouldn't be taking. So I'm actually very worried that next time that bookseller will think that 40 degrees is normal or something like this. So it's a worrying sign for Rusana.
Yes, maybe I can add something that I live in a city which is in the coastline, and something which wasn't normal before. In 1st of October, here was something like 30 degrees, and people went to the beach. And people here don't look at this from the side. It's something is happening. Climate change is real. They just look at the good part. They can go to the beach, and it's something okay for them. And I think that the municipality here don't pay much attention on this topic, and this is something on which we have to work.
Yeah, and it's interesting what you're saying, because I think in my beginning, I was sort of suggesting perhaps that other concerns, the war, the cost of living or whatever, is actually one of the reasons for that. But your example of people going to the beach, and it's happened in England as well, where we thought it actually was nice to have hot weather. It's not as though we're worried, in that moment, we're not worried about something else. We're actually just looking at it this the wrong way around. So Rusana, any thoughts on that? Is it, what's the balance of people worried about new worries like the cost of living and energy prices and whatever, versus just not really being able to think about this huge medium-term thing, which is a challenge to us all?
If we get you, I think that the people here just don't have the habit to think about the consequence of one event. They don't think of this rise of temperature like something which will stay in the future. They think about the moment, because we don't pay much attention on this in school, which is the base of the knowledge of the people. So
Okay, and maybe we can come to that point about school, Rusana, towards the end of the conversation, where we think about solutions. So, so we've got a couple of questions, but before that, let's just move into, so what are the best examples at the moment of people doing something about this? So Radi, you talked about that policy initiative. Do you want to add anything else to that? Apostol, Rusana, can we point to things which we feel are helping, moving things in the right direction in Bulgaria?
Yeah, sure, I can start. Well, for me, there is enormous potential in the renovation of residential buildings in Bulgaria. My colleagues will say more in the next panel, but for me, providing easy access for the households to different financial incentives and financial tools is crucial to speed the transition towards decarbonization in Bulgaria. It's also important the people to be provided with guidance and expertise how the good energy renovation should look like, for what they should pay attention during the construction works. And of course, here I'm also talking about integrating renewables into the homes of the citizens. Still, the administrative burden is high. Some legislative changes are needed. For example, introducing the definition of energy cooperatives or energy communities. But overall, this is the direction. First, implementing energy saving measures and reducing consumption. And then everyone who would like to can become part of the decentralized and democratized energy system, which means to allow to households, medium and small businesses, actually everyone who wants, to be able to generate their own electricity at a reasonable price. And just one more thing related to that is the need for transformation of the district heating companies in Bulgaria, which are currently mainly using fossil gas and coal, while they should start fastly introducing more and more renewables into their energy mix. And yeah, this is something we would like to see in Bulgaria starting.
Okay, but we'd like to see them, Radi, but is progress being made in those areas? And again, we'll hear about that more in the panel, I'm sure. But
if I can add something, I mean, it's utterly depressing because of the way that it's happening. But unfortunately, the war in Ukraine has created some progress and dynamism towards the centralization and democratization of the Bulgarian energy system in terms of electricity, because we see, due to the Russian attacks on Ukraine's energy infrastructure, and I have this from colleagues, that the over-reliance on a centralized power grid rather than decentralized renewable option creates some security risks. And I see both companies and individuals in Bulgaria that are now actively trying to acquaint themselves and looking for kind of a decentralized renewable systems. Yeah,
and that's exactly as you say. It's depressing to think why that's happening, but if that is pushing, there is a sort of, at least there's some sort of vague upside from a horrible thing. I mean, what I was struck by as well, I'm so pleased that there's that message of hope, Apostol, because I was just reading Biden was talking about the super profits that the oil and gas majors are making and asking them, of course, to increase production. So he wasn't saying let's invest in local solutions which provide, greater security. He was asking people to increase production. So I'm delighted to hear your story. So Rusana, just on the positive side, whether this is, education, greater inclusion in curriculum, whatever it might be, Can you point to things which give you a bit of hope? Some of the things, the activities, the mechanisms that you see?
Yes, I can talk about my city because I think it's a good example. The transport here since maybe 6 or 7 years. The main transport in our town is bus, and most of the people here use them. And also thing which is way of transport which we use here is bicycle, because the cycle paths in my town connected every point of the city. And there is and if you are young or you are a worker at our town, it's really normal, just walk, use bicycle or go with the bus. And in my opinion, it's something really important, and I hope that in the future it will be banned for the cars which don't have a certificate or which are not electrical to go into the city center or city car zone.
And is that, Rusana, is that example held up as a good example nationally? Do people talk about it and then people try and copy it in other places? Or is it?
Yeah, I think it's a good example which should be followed in other cities.
Okay. Sounds ideal. Okay, so let's just pick a couple of these questions that have come in from the floor. So the first one to Radi, about companies. So what about companies? You know, whether you're interacting with them or you see them being active against this agenda in Bulgaria?
Yeah, that's a good question. Unfortunately, so far we haven't been much in touch in companies on climate or environmental education, although sometimes we've been invited to speak on different topics in front of their interested employees. But for sure, I think companies have a role in the process, even if by only allowing young people to see and to experience themselves the various decarbonization technologies and approaches while doing internship there or during a field trip and study visit. And I think it's already a good sign that more and more companies are recognizing the importance of sustainability and of carbon and climate neutrality, and are trying to incorporate it in their business plans. But still, we need huge involvement to be able to deliver on the Paris Agreement.
Yeah, I mean, I would 100% agree with that. That it's, you know, there's this sort of bizarre conversation about, you know, should it be grassroots or should it be policy or should it be private sector or public sector? Of course, it's everybody in some shape or form, and particularly I would have argued companies, because very often they have, you know, international reach, so they can import best practice well. But also because, you know, they provide all that employment, that opportunity to educate, yeah, et cetera, So anyway, Apostol, any thoughts on that? Private sector, business involvement, how much do you engage with them?
We're continually engaging with the private sector, and we see very progressive uptake on their side, especially with regard to renewable energy transition. Most companies in most sectors are actually quite progressive on this, much more so than the government and other stakeholders in Bulgaria. They're signing private purchase agreements. They're exploring ways also to address their Scope 3 emissions, which means the emissions of their consumers, their suppliers, their value chains. So actually, business has been on the front leading side in Bulgaria. I mean, we have seen some good examples there. I don't want to name any particular company, but we see them. They still have to do a lot of work to go against the stream of this kind of public PR negative perception of the Green Deal in our region.
Yeah, and it was interesting that one of our clubhouse sessions we had yesterday, there's a very small company, but a progressive company. It was based in the UK, and or the brand is progressive, and they were talking about what they're doing, and they haven't yet done their scope 3. So sitting in the UK, we've got our Act for 2050, there's all sorts of communication opportunity tools and everything else, and we're talking to a progressive company, and the progressive company is still planning, not executing against its scope 3. So just a small indication of how far we've got to travel on this, even for progressive companies. And maybe Rusana, similar question to you though, is, as you're thinking about, obviously you've got to study first, and then you think about your, if you like, your career, but what is the attitude to joining private companies from the people who are concerned about this issue like you? So do you have a bias for or against the private sector and business?
Well, I'm not sure where I'm going to work in private sector or in the municipality or something like that. Yes, for me, it is high priority, the business in I work to be with focus on the environment and to be more sustainable. And I think that it's something more and more common for the young people who want to study natural sciences to focus on this topic and to take care about this.
Okay, very good. I mean, there is another question in there about civil disobedience, which Apostol, you've answered, and I suppose just to say, yeah, I think a lot of us are casting around with, the right way to behave and what to do to make a difference. And as you said, it's no surprise, given the lack of overall progress, that people are reaching for civil disobedience. And certainly in the UK, the punishment, people are being imprisoned for significant amounts of time for sitting in a road. So, yeah, the great, courage displayed. There's a lot of contention around whether or not that's an appropriate and valid thing to do. But I think, we've all seen the need for, a certain type of activism to move the centre in the past.
Yeah.
So,
but also I have to congratulate you, because in the UK you have a great tradition of non-violent civil disobedience that goes back many decades and many causes, starting even with abolitionism 200 years ago. So in our region we have to still explain that civil disobedience, when it is valid, it has to be non-violent, of course, against persons, and that it has to be very well directed at the appropriate and responsible parties, and does not cause like unnecessary disruption unless it really is justified. And I think in the examples from the UK, Switzerland, where we see again IPCC lead authors lying on roads, I think we see also cases where it is justified, considering the grave danger. So it's a good question.
yeah. Well, thank you for that question. Okay, so right, let's just move on to our final question before we get on to the next panel. So my final question, favorite question indeed, yeah, which I've run across the different countries, and we tend to get different responses, which is interesting. So this is really sort of what is that single priority? And this might be something to do with the work you do, or it might be something you observe, outside of the work you do. But what is that single thing, that single lever that you think we need to massively increase the speed, the scope, the scale of transformation, particularly in Bulgaria, against the climate transition? So what is that single thing? And just, I'll tell you the summary later, but the UK, so Scotland and then England, very different responses to that from France, as an example. So I'm fascinated in hearing what you three think about that.
I'll go first because my question is depressing, and I hope that you say something more optimistic. I think the single thing that will really make a change on the ground of Bulgaria is for the hybrid campaign against the European Union and against the European Green Deal, the institutions of the European Union and democracy, to stop. We know that most of this hybrid campaign is unfortunately directed from Russian proxies, and it has to stop. This is very important for our country.
Okay, and Apostol, just to help us, so less familiar. So you're saying if that stops, then you basically become more aligned to what's
Then we
happening.
have public civic space for open dialogue and for thinking about solutions and engaging stakeholders who are right now basically being pitted violently against each other on the issues of co-exit or anything else.
Thank you. Got it. Right.
Well, I guess I have a positive one and a negative. And maybe I'll start with the negative. As we talked in the beginning of the discussion, only after people experience themselves some kind of negative climate event, they would be better, they would be willing to act on it and to try to prevent happening again for them, but also for other people. And it's true that more and more people are experiencing or even only watching the news and hearing of such stronger events in Bulgaria, in the neighboring village or town. And the positive one is again related to energy efficiency, doing energy renovation to become so easy and accessible that everyone can do it for almost no any big effort on their side. And yeah, this will have a huge effect not only on reducing the emissions, but also on improving their comfort, and after experiencing themselves would spread the word to others to follow.
Got it. So just on that first one, Radi. So you're saying you're basically saying, you know, people should be more aware and attribute, you know, bad things to climate change. Yeah.
Well, yeah, to be able to see the connection, even if it's so not a direct one.
Got it. And what would drive that? Just to push on it, because I'm trying to sort of come down to a lever that somebody could do about it. So how would what are you advocating? Is that public information? Is that what would allow people to make that connection better?
Yes, public information, also more appearances of the climate topic in the news. But again, as they ask themselves, okay, what can I do? They should have the instruments to make the easiest steps for them, like not only to use more environmentally friendly transport, but to change their heating source, to do the energy renovation, to integrate renewables. So yeah, they should be accessible for everyone.
Okay, very clear. Thank you. Rusana, final answer.
Yeah, for me also, it's her priority to raise the awareness of the topic about climate change. We have to begin, yes, how I said previously, from the school, and because if we put this topic in our education, people will be more involved in this action in their future. And yes, especially maybe also to raise awareness about these topics in the news and become more, I don't know how to say, but people are more tend to listen the news which are more interesting and which are not true. And that's the problem of our society. And more and more news should be told by experts which are now related with the topic which they talk about.
Got it. Okay, thank you very much indeed, Radi, Apostol, Rusana. Great stuff. So if we can now move on to our next panel. So in order, perhaps we can hear, so I think we're expecting or hoping Julian's going to join, but if we could hear from Drago, then Plamena, and then Todor. So same deal. Let's have, you know, circa 5 minutes of your best. Looking forward to that. And then let's see where the conversation takes us. We'll keep an eye on Q&A, and we'll end up with the key question. Okay. So Drago, you're on.
Right. Thanks, Sam, and great to be here among all of you. Actually, I'm just chatting with Julian. He's driving. She should be here as well in a few minutes. So, but we'll leave him for dessert, for a final speech, and he always is quite productive in that kind of situation. But you know, let's go back to the point. So my name is Dragomir Tzanev. I'm executive director of EnEffect, and EnEffect is basically the oldest NGO in Bulgaria that is working on sustainable energy issues. We are mostly experienced in buildings energy efficiency, and I really would like to thank to Radi for pointing out the importance of building renovation, which I would also try to tackle later on. But you know, being a policy consultant on energy, on sustainable energy issues, is also very important to have several other area of competences developed. So besides the consultancy, or we back up the consultancy with technical knowledge. We are doing energy efficiency audit of buildings, of industrial systems, and I believe yeah, our team is quite experienced and quite good in that. So we have direct feedback from the market, and we try to follow the new technologies, the new design approaches, the new materials that are coming to the fore. Then we are also working with the local authorities, and I'm very, very happy to have Todor here, because in energy and climate policies, despite all the talk that we get through the media, change happens at the local level. And we do have to understand that we have to empower the local authorities and the local communities to deal what is most suitable for that. And that's a very, very complex issue, but that's the talk of the day. And I can, you know, really stand behind these words, because I'm just on the back of 2 weeks spent in Brussels. And really, it's the problem is how to speed up the decentralization process across Europe. And on the other hand, we are also still managing, I would say, the Bulgarian Energy Efficiency and Renewable Sources Fund, which gives us a perspective into sustainable energy financing. I have the hope that someday I'll be able to call it smart financing. Still, this is not the case. Still, we are facing lots of issues to introduce innovative financing instruments that can speed up the process and put it on a sustainable basis. And still our policies are really grant-oriented, subsidy-oriented, which is a barrier that we have to overcome together with the help of the market, with the help of the business that was correctly tackled into the questions before. And basically, yes, that's our framework. The one thing that I would like always to point out in our presentation is that we are very, very active in international research and innovation projects, mostly funded by the European Commission, so Horizon 2020 Life, now Horizon Europe to the fore. And that is something that that is actually the place where we get our knowledge. And we've been really lucky to be, I would say, active, not only active, but also successful to a certain extent, and collaborate with multiple partners EU-wide, and that gives us sometimes a broader overview and quite, I would say, strong affiliation to the European policy direction, which put us into certain kind of disputes and arguments with the national government. But that's how life should work, and I trust that in that kind of argument we'll find the best solution for the years to come.
Very good. Thank you. Plamena.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for the invitation to participate in this event. I'm Plamena, and I'm the founder and coordinator of Climateka. Climateka is a science popular platform that we're trying to raise awareness about climate change in Bulgaria, and we work with scientists and experts who create altered content. And we collaborate also with journalists and media to try to reach the broader audience through their network. And I think this is very important. Raising awareness is a very, very important basic step that we should achieve. And we work with more than 20 scientists and experts. Yes, we except for the articles that we create, we organize a lot of events, and we try to encourage collaboration between between the journalists and the scientists. And the previous panel, the people mentioned the big misinformation wave that we're experiencing in Bulgaria, and it's happening in different fields, but climate change is one of the big ones of this. So I think it's very important to have science proven content that is easily accessible and in a good language for the general public, so they can understand all the cause and effects and the challenges and solutions that we have already. So that people are more informed part in the whole dialogue.
Brilliant. And Plamena, which audience do you target? Is this the mass public, or is this quite?
Yes, the general public, and we target it through different media. So, for example, we work with energy media who are covering energy, agriculture, and depending on the topic, we reach different stakeholders and people.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. Todor.
Thank you.
Hello, happy to be a part of this event, and it's a pleasure for me to be among these panelists. Actually, my name is Todor Popov, and I'm here to represent the municipality of Gabrovo. It's very important to know that we pretend to be one of the leaders in the energy efficiency policy and sustainable development in Bulgaria, of course. Why not in the EU, but for now, just in Bulgaria. And it's very complicated for the local authorities because actually we need to solve the global challenges with the local resource and fundings and capacity. And that's to make the task very, very hard because sometimes the global issue as the climate changes and the temperature increase is not directly feel by the people on the ground. For example, when we spoke to people that the water is a resource that is not guaranteed to everyone, it's hard for some people in Gabrovo to believe that, because for now we, as a mountain town, we have a lot of water, but it's just for now. And just after 3 or 5 years, after we start to explain to people about this problem, several villages around the Gabrovo are without guarantee a connection to the water. So here is the first point that we need to solve. Not just Gabrovo, every local authority need to solve the global issues, the global challenges on the ground. Maybe the problem is not yet in fact or feel strong by the citizen. Another issue that we are face every day is to find the balance between the different interests, because if we are NGOs or company, we have the clear targets group, the clear interest, and somehow the resource that we used. In our situation, and I think the problem is to find the balance between the sustainable development of the local citizens and group, and how to preserve and save the environmental. Because sometimes the policy that is very aggressive in the field of the green policy, it can have the negative impact on the economic growth. Or other side, if we set some restriction to the citizen, it's hard from them to accept. For example, if we would like to set some. Bravo, would you like to say something? Okay, so if we, for example, if we decide to have some restriction for the cars with a lot of harmful emissions, it impacted on the citizen, and here is the political. The other issues that we also take into account, that we have the political instrument, but also we are political institution, and we need to to take this into account. And so what I'd like to highlight for our municipality, first of all, we are very happy and proud that in the last year we finalized our contract for a fully replacement of the street lighting in Gabrovo with the energy performance contract. And this is one of the measures that support us on the one hand with reducing the CO2 emissions, but from the other side with increasing price of the electricity. So here is also another lesson that we learned, and it is that the green policy is not just policy about to save the environmental, but it's also economical development, because we save a lot of money, maybe more than 60% of the billing that we pay. So from my point of view, it's very important to speak to the citizen, not just for the green transition, green energy, green policy, but also to say the green is also economical, sustainable, etc. Where is our main problem? The main problem is that, as I say, we have the local resources and a lot of challenges to meet: the air pollution, the climate changes, and a lot of infrastructural problems. So we need to find the best solution, and of course we need a lot of support from the citizens and the business. And if I am able now to say, to answer the question, what's the role of the business? It's also to supporting the policy that local and national government have, because it's hard to have the local to involve the citizen, for example, to save their CO2 emission or to organize better waste separation, if they see that the companies are not doing that, and they're the main consumer of this harmful effect. So, and for final, for now, I'd like to say that from this year, Gabrovo is one of the 2 cities in Bulgaria that are part of the EU 100 missions for the climate neutral cities. And also we are for more than 5 years participating in the Convent of Mayors and other initiatives, also in an urban agenda for the EU. And we have implemented different projects that try to meet all the stakeholders, the business, the science, the media even, and of course the public authority, and to try to implement the solution that are acceptable for all the stakeholders. Thank you for now. And
that is extremely interesting. And the just a sense, do you think the citizens are on side generally, or do you think, does it have to be one, every campaign, every action, every initiative, and you're sort of fighting a battle for hearts and minds?
It's the very hard process, because as I say, we should find a balance between the economical, the mentality. One of the issues that we try to find every day is the mentality, because it's not a secret that the Balkan mentality is a little bit different. We are not so straight. And for example, in the project for the waste management, a new system of waste management and collection of the waste, it's very hard to show the people that this is something good for them. Even though they see this in Europe, in other countries, they say, okay, but if we have this practice from Europe, why we haven't another? And we can't do everything on one step. On another side is very hard when there is still programs and funds that 100% grant for the citizen, to involve them in another initiatives that need to have their effort, never mind if it's a financial or just physical or a mentality change. Or for example, if we ask them to use the public transport, even if it's on a good organized, it's just not so acceptable, because they need to take into account when the bus come. They are not used. They like to use their car because it's more, they feel more free. Never mind the effect. So yes, they support the initiatives when they see the easy and the fast result directly for them. For example, as any of the previous panelists spoke about the energy efficiency in the residential building. Of course, until it was free, the people hard start to involve in the project because we need to I'm so sorry. We need to inform them about the positives, everything. After that, when they see the benefits from the energy efficiency, they become more active. Now, when we are in front of the new wave of the energy efficiency in the residential buildings, they are active now. But it's after 5 years of seeing the benefits, that there is no cheating and no someone tried to. But the problem is that after March of the next year, it will be co-funded from them. So in this period, the interest rate will be decreased, I'm sure, because there is few that it's not correct, because the first one was 100% free and they should to benefit. But the process is going well. I think that they start to realize, and when their bills for energy and for everything start to increase because of the liberalization of the market, they will feel the benefits faster. And I think that this is one of the measures that we should to implement, to inform them and always to show them with the pictures, with the graphics, with materials, not just to speak and talk to them.
Got it. Okay, thank you. So Drago, perhaps we can come to you and just talk about sort of progress. So you've talked about policy and you talked about some, you've alluded to some progress, but in general, if you take the Bulgarian housing stock, got any sort of stats on where we're at? So what proportion are, if you like, energy efficient, or where's the progress, and what are the great examples other than the municipality of Gabrovo, that is? But
all right, yes, the municipality of Gabrovo is a really good example because they have invested years in developing their best practices and in showing their best practices to the communities, to the local communities. And honestly, they're doing it because I've seen that myself, by investing their personal time outside the working space in these kind of community engagement actions. No, or very few other municipalities do it with such motivation and with such high spirit, and that's really an example to follow. But more generally speaking, I would say that the building renovation process has been quite a problematic and really not a continuous one, a campaigning process, which is led by certain constellation of circumstances, which have been risen through the years. So what do I mean? We had renovation programs since 2008. 2008 is a lot of time ago. We started to try to do it in a centralized way. It wouldn't work, and that's pretty normal. There is absolutely no trust, first of all, in the government, and that trust decreases with the years. And on the other hand, you wouldn't believe that someone would go and negotiate with the central government for the renovation of residential building which is 300 kilometers away. So this didn't work, and the government would confess the failure in design. It would blame the low incomes of the Bulgarians. It would blame whatever kind of fortune that you can imagine. But of course, there wouldn't be any mistake in the strategic decisions. Now, there was a point where the economic situation and the personal initiatives of certain decision makers allowed a very ambitious, I would say, in terms of volume, in terms of financial volume, program for building renovation. That program invested, as Todor mentioned, 1 billion euro, a huge amount of money by, for everybody that knows money, that's a huge amount of money. But it invested it in building renovation in 100% subsidy rate. So the homeowners, the owners, they didn't have to pay any single cent into for the renovation action. And yeah, back then we said directly that it's a crime. It's a crime because it gives public money to a very limited number of homeowners, and it gives absolutely no attention. It pays absolutely no attention to knowledge in every kind of the work, in developing professional knowledge, in developing knowledge about the results, in developing knowledge about the skills that the construction workers should have. And actually the argument there from the side of the government is okay that we're starting that, we want to turn the wheel, we want people to understand by experience, and then we'll reduce the subsidy intensity, and we'll continue further with that. Absolutely nothing from that happened. And now, let's say 7 years later, after an investment of nearly 1.5 billion euro in building renovation, the whole amount of renovated multifamily buildings is, let's say, up to 3%. Or to put it into real figures, we have renovated about 1,500 out of 60,000 multifamily buildings that need renovation. At the same time, no resource was channeled to the single-family buildings, where half of the population lives in the smaller cities, which are mostly affected by energy poverty, which basically do not have in many occasions basic living conditions. So I wouldn't say that this is a success. No way. I would, by the way, call it a failure, even though it was communicated in many political circles at European level, at international level, as a huge success of the Bulgarian government and a huge dedication and a lot of money thrown in green development. No, actually, that was not sustainable, and that was something that we have to learn as a lesson and not replicate in the future years. Now we are at the position that after spending several years in promising that yes, someday the program will continue, yes, we are thinking how to continue it, another big inflow of money came to that sector through the recovery and resilience mechanism, and we have the plan, which is again communicated as very ambitious and channeling more than 1/3 of the resources to green development and even more. And again, we are following the same corrupted patterns by throwing money to the final beneficiaries without looking for any responsibility on their side and without investing anything in knowledge. Knowledge is the keyword here, by the way. It's, when designed or shaped to the different stakeholders, knowledge would be the keyword, which without outcome. But just to come back to the current situation, we have again 1 billion a little bit less thrown to the residential building at 100% grant scheme, which is communicated to shift to 80%, but reading the conditions of the code, that's not going to happen. We have again lots of money, 200 million euro thrown at 100% rate to the municipal buildings at a very contradictory procedure. And again, there is no reform and there is no responsibility given to the expected from the beneficiary. And that's what we have to tackle. And that's something that we as a community must deliver as a message to our policymakers, but not only to our policymakers, also to the other key stakeholders that influence the decisions of the policymakers. And these are the media, and these are the European institutions, and these are the United Nations institutions, and these are formats like COP, because questions have to be asked and have to be answered there by the Bulgarian representatives. And that's why, by the way, I don't know if anyone has followed my our social media endeavors there. We're really asking the question, what would the hell, sorry, our key policymakers do in Egypt? Because they are not opening any kind of talk about climate issues in the internal scene that they have. So do we know what kind of values they'll protect, what kind of engagement they would take, they would deliver as a national engagement? Would they protect the reforms that we have been discussing for the past 10 years? And they have, from time to time, secretly in professional events said, okay, we know all of that, but it's not the moment now. And coming to an end of that probably quite dramatic exposure, I would like to say that, again, it's a reform that we need in terms of approach, in terms of financing, but it is a reform that we need on how we approach public investments in order to generate knowledge. And we need to reform our thinking about that investment, first of all, to generate knowledge of the beneficiaries. What is their responsibility? What are the benefits that they can expect? And what should they consider to pay against these benefits?
Okay, so Drago, just to be super clear on that.
Yeah, just
okay, go on.
one, two more arguments. Then the knowledge after the beneficiaries would be to the professional audience. And there is another knowledge that we have to establish, and that's in the media, in the journalists that have to bring forward that kind of interest, attention towards quality in the public policies. So that's what I wanted to say to you. And by the way, I trust that Julian is using my account, and that's why he appears here as Drago, and I hope that he's with us as well.
Interesting.
So we might approach him as well.
Okay, so Plamena, Julian, if you can hear us, we'll welcome you in a minute. So Plamena, it's all very interesting because there's quite a lot obviously about communication and awareness here. But just before we go there, Drago, I just want to be clear. So if I understand what you said, so, there's been quite a lot of funding available, particularly for refurbishing homes. That has been a sort of 100% subsidy to private homes, typically, which, as you said, is not necessarily a fair or a just approach necessarily, because they're not necessarily the people who need it most. But the key thing is that it hasn't driven a sense of responsibility or of knowledge in its application and mechanism. So what I'm just asking you is what knowledge do you expect to, so if I own a home and I get 100%, beautiful, great refurbishment to lots of insulation and solar panels on the roof or whatever, right? What knowledge do you think I need to, what is my responsibility and what knowledge do I need? Because from a climate perspective, I don't need any knowledge or responsibility if it's been done, right? So just to clear that up.
Yep, but the knowledge that you need is that you're 1 in 10,000 that are getting to that to this benefit, and the other 19,999 people that are living around you would continue to pollute and would continue to spend on energy and would continue to keep down your economic growth because you're living in the same community as they do. So that's for you. But for the others that do not receive anything, what kind of knowledge should they develop? Is the knowledge that they should wait for the next guru or the next fairy tale hero come and throw the money at them, or they should think of doing something themselves?
Okay, I get it. So basically the package of change has to include awareness and broad responsibility building. It's not that you're focusing the awareness on the people who receive the money, it's just more general. Yeah,
precisely, because it's not an individual problem, it's a social and it's a community problem, and we have to deal with it that way.
Okay, super clear. So Plamena, as a professional, communicator and awareness builder, so maybe two things, a good example of a campaign that you think has worked to give us some hope, and then any sort of broader reflections on what you've just heard from Drago and indeed from Todor at a more local level.
I think Drago mentioned something very important, the role of media in the whole awareness building. And I think Bulgaria is a little bit, unfortunately, a laggard in this respect, because we see very good examples in Western, like developed countries, for example. Most of the media already have separate rubrics covering environment and climate, which still in Bulgaria we see very, very rarely. Also, the specialization of journalists, we see in Bulgaria still most of the journalists are covering several different topics, and just environment and climate is one of them. It's one small bit of the whole picture. And I think we and the society in general is missing because of all those things, because in this case the materials and the final messages lack depth and analysis, and there is a lot to be improved in this respect. Of course, we have some good and professional journalists. I don't want to offend anyone, but I think there is still huge room of improvement, and we're trying to work on this. And we're trying to, as Climateka, but also the other organizations, we're trying to link more the scientists and the experts to work closely with journalists, and in that way to bring from one side the knowledge of those people, and on the other side the journalists are exactly the people who know how to tell the stories and to make them more emotional, to touch the people, and to make it relevant to the society. So I think this is something very important, and we also you also mentioned it in the first panel, that sometimes people, they cannot link the events to climate change. So this is something that media should try to explain and to bring forward. In terms of successful campaign in Bulgaria, to be honest, I'm not pretty sure I can give such good example recently. Maybe I'll think a little bit and I'll come back in a minute.
Yeah, fingers crossed for good campaigns in May. But just interesting to your point about the connection. So at the beginning of the heat wave, and it changed quickly in the UK. So, you know, Apostol enjoyed that heat wave, or the pre-heat wave. The beginning of it, there was coverage around ice creams and, you know, going to beaches and things like that. And it changed quite quickly. I don't know who led the change, but, you know, obviously, presumably one of the media outlets changed it, and then everybody followed. And it changed within days. Very interesting. So that flipped. I was speaking to a journalist yesterday who works for a North American media house. She's being sent to COP to cover COP. She was surprised because her observation was that, you know, the heads of state aren't going. So I don't really know why. You know, she personally thinks it's obviously important. She's delighted she's going, but generally they only get sent if they're sort of heads of state. So I thought that was interesting as well, because it feels like the first example, somehow the media sorted themselves out and to get to the right story, which was great. The second one, it feels like, you know, if other people apportion importance to this, then the media follows. So obviously it's a bit of both, but it's interesting to see if it's push or pull. And yes, we do need them to be progressive. So
yeah, just wanted to say, yeah, that's exactly the important role of media, because they say that they present the narrative, so they can just leave the facts. For example, there is 1.2 increase in the temperature for the last 30 years, which is the fact for Bulgaria, but they can also explain what comes from that, like and what caused it and so forth. So it's their role to present it and bring it to the audience.
Got it. Thank you. So Julian, can you hear us? Are you Drago by another name?
I can hear you, and apologies that I'm on the road, but if you can hear me, that will be okay.
No, we can see. I'm very glad to see you.
I don't sit in my office with a safety belt. Just to clarify that.
Very good. So Julian, just what we've done with the others is we've asked us for a sort of 4 to 5 minutes for people to summarize their perspective on climate change. So sort of, what they're doing, but also what they observe, and with a particular focus on Bulgaria. And then we've asked a series of follow-up questions. So would you like to do your sort of 4 to 5 minute, positioning on what you're doing, but also your perspective on climate change and its responses, the challenges and responses?
Yes, of course. Thank you very much first for the opportunity to join. I hope you hear me well. And well, what I'm doing, I'm fellow of the European Climate Foundation, and also I chair the Building Performance Institute Europe. And the BPA is probably the leading Brussels-based think tank that is dealing with building policies and urban policies, which means that it's very much focused on the demand side of energy. And in terms of what I'm doing in the last months, among the various things that I'm doing, I'm quite sort of frustrated, which is more of a condition than doing, about something that Drago mentioned and spoke about in Bulgaria, but I would spread it even wider in a European context. One thing that is very serious in understanding and acting on the energy crisis, but also the climate crisis and the climate action, is to understand the value and the importance of the demand side of energy. And this is not just Bulgaria that is doing, as Drago very rightly said, almost kind of a criminal thinking of spending 100% grants for renovation and so on. But it's also the deeper question of understanding how important the demand side of the energy equation is. And this is not understood on European level. We have this promise with the coming of the current commission about the renovation wave. So the renovation wave was announced as some great idea, how we will increase the rate of innovation, we'll increase the depth of innovation, renovation of buildings, but also we will focus much more on energy efficiency. And there is even this slogan, efficiency first, which every single politician signed underneath and say, yes, absolutely, I'm about efficiency first. The problem is that most of the politicians do not understand what efficiency first is. They think that efficiency first means that you will go on stage and say, yes, I love efficiency and I like renewable energy and I love culture and children and nature and everything that's good. That's not efficiency first. Efficiency first is an investment approach which you assess the opportunities that efficiency improvements will give you before jumping into the energy supply side. So that failed, the renovation wave failed, and now when we see the reaction on the war on Ukraine and the energy crisis, we see that the whole demand side of energy is ignored, and everybody is saying where we can find gas, but there is very little discussion and proper action or how we can reduce in an economically sound way energy consumption. And this is very important. And there is a fantastically interesting and entertaining debate in the United Kingdom, which now we're celebrating the resignation of Liz Truss, who resigned after 45 days in office. But this argument and this fight about reducing the temperature of condensing boilers. So it sounds very technical, but if the country turns the temperature of their boilers with 10 degrees down, they will produce the same energy much more efficiently. And nobody knows that, and nobody is doing anything about that. And there's this kind of amazing things across Europe are happening. And it's a massive, massive task for us in Bulgaria, for us as Europeans and us as global citizens to understand and to promote the idea that energy sector means supply and it means demand. And if you leave the demand out, you just don't understand what is going on.
Okay.
Here I rest my case.
They're very clear, and I didn't know that about Truss. I spend most of my time with my BBC News on, but that happened since the beginning of the call, right?
10 minutes. She resigned after 45 minutes, and it's and it's a great thing for climate, because she was the person who said that Prince Charles and King Charles now can't go to Egypt to kind of present his. I mean, one. I mean, and many other things. Also, her focus, her complete disregard of energy efficiency, of demand action, and so on. So it's also climate news.
Well, I was going to say, let's see who replaces her, but fingers crossed, it couldn't be. You think it couldn't be worse, right? And to your point, though, about the demand side, as you'll be aware, there was a public awareness campaign planned, as I understand, in the final stages of execution, which was all around how we might conserve energy. And very often, you know, those things don't necessarily require a change in living standard. They require a change in behavior, but not necessarily in quality of life or living standard. But that was dropped because the government, maybe Liz Truss, maybe somebody close to her, didn't want to be seen to be controlling, like the nanny state, they call it. So it was extremely interesting that you think it's a no-brainer, Julian, and so important and critical, but politically somehow it got caught up on the wrong side of the debate.
Yes, absolutely. And this view about nanny state, I mean, it's at the moment something becomes ideological, it becomes a massive problem. It's fine that the state shouldn't interfere in everything and so on, but the problem is when that becomes kind of ideological slogan, and in this case, it is focused not so much on nanny state, but nanny state don't educate people. People, they should decide whether to be educated. They should decide whether to be informed, which is quite wrong, basically.
Yeah, and I think that you know, we're all familiar, you know, we're all thrashing around trying to think of the most important lever to create this change that we need. And I think that one of the points about sort of, you know, do you have top-down intervention versus do you stimulate and encourage, you know, capitalism to do this for us or whatever, you know, part of the context of that is really important. So if you've only got a very short amount of time to do very radical things, then that leads you to one answer. If you've got a relatively long time to prepare the ground and to change and transition, that leads you to another answer.
Exactly, so, absolutely.
Okay, so thank you for that intervention. So I think because there are four of you and we've got a small amount of time left, let us go to the favorite question then. So the single lever, and again, it doesn't necessarily need to be deeply based in your own area of expertise. It could be something else. But let's see if those compare and contrast to what we've heard already. So Todor, should we go to you first and then go to Plamena and then Drago and then finish up with Julian? So the one thing, again, it's the speed, the scope, the scale of the transformation. So what is going to catalyze that beyond all else? What's critically required?
I think that it's not surprised. I think for the first time, the critical issue is to change the mentality and to increase the knowledge and experience of the citizen, because they are citizen, but after that they are worker, they are employee, they are politicals. Everything starts from the citizen as them. And just to let me share what we do in this area, just two examples. For example, today I just skip some part of Gabrovo Innovation Camp, where we collect people with the ideas of innovation and good ideas for the projects, initiatives. And one of the topics that now they discuss is exactly climate changes and adaptation to the climate changes. So I think this way we see the different opinions, the different stakeholders on ground. And another one is our third edition of the Uzana Polyana. This is a big festival that the main issue is the climate and ecological, because there is only the presentation about the nature, about the eco energy efficiency, etc., etc. And this is 3 days in the mountain where the people with the same interests meet each other. So this is maybe for first critical issue, the mentality to change. Because just to add, if you Drago agree, what is need to be the owners of the buildings that are renovated to change their mentality. Never mind what kind of energy efficiency measures we implemented, solar panels, isolation, windows, etc., etc. If they use the heater and open the door for all the day just because they feel better, it's absolutely stupid investment do in their apartment, flat, etc. So I think this is also very important, how to operate our energy efficiency home. Thank you.
Thank you. Drago.
My turn? Right. If it's my turn, yep. Definitely, unfortunately, I must tell in the beginning that there's no silver bullet. You cannot just change one thing and expect a total system change. But what we need, if I have to put it into few words, a few or more, as many as possible, informed opinion leaders acting at national and at local level. And for that, we need to support, to find, first of all, identify such people, support them professionally and informationally, open to them communication channels, and let them grow and develop. So that's the one thing for me that would change the landscape, and that would bring the topic to the attention of the end users. And then we have to work locally. We need capacity, we need resources to work locally to do what the city of Gabrovo is doing, what the city of Burgas is doing, a few more, but they're still far too few in order to make a major change. So basically, that's what is our priority at the moment.
Got it. And Drago, a clarifier, are these roles that exist, but you want those people to lead on this topic, or are they new roles, new types of people?
So we need new people, new leaders that put that topic to the center of the attention. And these people have to be recognizable. They have to have their political and social influence, and we need to support them as community, because we miss leaders. We miss leaders in that area, and we need to form them as a community, as a professional community.
Yes. Thank you. Plamena.
I'll kind of repeat what Todor and Drago said, but it's also part of my field. So for me, communication, which is awareness, engagement, and action. So in order to reach to action, we should go through the other layers before. And I totally agree with Drago that we need new faces, and it could be scientists, experts, different kind of ambassadors that should communicate. It could be in different levels also. They can target different audiences through different means. It could be art or something else, but we have to try to engage bigger part of the society and make them more informed. And I think also something to have more integrated approach, like Radostina said in the first panel, we used to have Vice Prime Minister that was about climate. So in terms of political leadership, I think we need this role also to kind of integrate all the actions towards one and the same direction.
Okay. Got it. Thank you. So, Julian.
Right. Yes. First, I will fully agree with the previous three speakers, and what I would add is that we need a very significantly more resource on research, because the energy systems are undergoing unbelievable transformation at the moment, and this transformation needs research on many on many different levels. And this is, it is essential that we
Julian, we're losing you.
keep proper knowledge. Yes, so that's the research that I would add to the picture that was described until now.
Okay, got it. I think we heard that. So the research element, very important. Yep. So it leaves me just to say thank you, everybody. Thank you for those who have listened in. Thank you for the people who will listen in. Thank you very much, the panelists, for such insight and such a wide-ranging conversation and some consensus, I thought, as well. So super interesting, some Bulgarian consensus there. We're all looking forward to joining Todor on those 3 days in the mountain, I think. That sounds super interesting. And what I normally do is just ask one person to say something, doesn't matter what it is, just to close down. I think in this case, Rusana, as a pre-university person, we just like you, whatever you want to say, just to reflect on what you've heard or something short. And then we will enjoy the rest of our afternoons.
Thank you. I'm really thankful that I have the opportunity to be part of this panel and to listen to these experts. And so I will just say that I'm really glad to see what will happen in the future, and I really want to be part of this eco-society, which will make the progress and the changes in our country.
Fantastic. So there you have it. The eco-society is the place to be, creating leaders, building awareness and changing society writ large. So fantastic. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a great afternoon. Don't forget to join the walk if you haven't already. I think Radi already said she had. Look forward to seeing you there. And Todor, I'll see you in the mountains.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.